Hello and welcome to Quiz Class. I'm your host, Ellen, and today we have 100 questions on general knowledge. Let's take a look at our Quiz Class awards. And here they are. Let us know how you rank in the comments at the end, along with the answer to the bonus question. And let's begin. Which 1960s home entertainment concept was marketed as theater without electricity and involved viewing film strip through a handheld device? Viewoscope, gaff Panaview, or handy film? Gaff Panaview. What was phreaking, a subculture that emerged in the late 50s? Early phone hacking using audio tones, underground art movement featuring psychedelic imagery, or weekend nature retreats aimed at urban professionals? Early phone hacking using audio tones. Which 1970s cognitive psychology term describes the mental shortcut where people judge probability based on how easily examples come to mind? Availability heuristic, representativeness bias, or conjunction fallacy? Availability heuristic. What unique fashion item was created by Mary Quant in 1965 and described as solving a practical problem? Colored tights, hot pants, or waterproof mascara? Waterproof mascara. Which early computing term from the 1940s described a software error and originated from an actual insect found in a machine? Glitch, bug, or crash? Bug. What was the mood organ, a fictional device in Philip K. Dick's 1968 novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? A machine allowing users to dial in specific emotions, a television that changed color based on ambient room sound, or a musical instrument? A machine allowing users to dial in specific emotions. Which 1950s cooking technique was originally called flavor scenting in marketing materials? Marinating, smoke infusion, or pressure cooking? Smoke infusion. What was the max headroom incident that occurred in Chicago in 1987? Television signal hijacking by unknown perpetrators, first computer-generated TV host debut, or power grid failure during primetime broadcasts? A television signal hijacking by unknown perpetrators. Which architectural element popular in 1970s commercial buildings was called the people tube? Pneumatic message system, glass enclosed elevator, or modular office partition? Glass enclosed elevator. What was the Curta calculator, an innovative device used from the 1940s to the 1970s? Stock market ticker tape reader, mechanical handheld calculator operated by rotating a crank, or mechanical handheld calculator operated by rotating a crank? And of course, mechanical handheld calculator operated by rotating a crank. Which post-World War II sociological concept described the phenomenon of families moving from urban centers to newly developed residential areas? Suburbanization, metropolitan fluidity, or urban decentralization? Suburbanization. What was the domino theory popularized in the 1950s? Architectural principle for modular housing, geopolitical hypothesis about communism spreading, or manufacturing workflow optimization technique? Geopolitical hypothesis about communism spreading. Which early internet term from the 1990s described a digital gathering space for topic-based discussions? Multi-user dungeon, webring, or forum? Forum. What was the Trash 80, a nickname for a popular 1970s product? Automatic garbage compactor, TRS-80 microcomputer, or budget film camera? TRS-80 microcomputer. Which psychology term, coined in the 60s, describes a phenomenon where group members strive for consensus at the expense of critically evaluating information? Groupthink, collective cognition, or social facilitation? Groupthink. What was Space Food Sticks, a product of the late 1960s? Freeze-dried ice cream, energy bars developed for astronauts, or vitamin-fortified breakfast cereal? Energy bars developed for astronauts. Which 1940s home technology was advertised as the electronic servant? Dishwasher, television, or clothes dryer? Television. What was the California look, an interior design trend of the 1970s? Pastel colors with Art Deco influences, natural materials with indoor-outdoor living emphasis, or high-tech minimalism with chrome accents? Natural materials with indoor-outdoor living emphasis. Which early video game released in 1971 was the first commercially available arcade game? Computer Space, Pong, or Space Invaders? Computer Space. What was the Parkinson principle formulated in the 1950s regarding organizational behavior? Work expands to fill the time available, management rises to its level of incompetence, or organizations naturally trend toward bureaucracy? Work expands to fill the time available. Which 1960s technology was known as the Norden counter? Early barcode scanner for retail, mechanical vote tabulator, or radio signal strength meter? Early barcode scanner for retail. What was Burpee's Big Boy, popular in American household during the 1950s? A kitchen canister set, tomato variety for home gardeners, or children's mechanical toy? Tomato variety for home gardeners. Which psychological phenomenon named in the 1970s describes why people continue investing in something they know is failing? Escalation of commitment, sunk cost fallacy, or choice supportive bias? Escalation of commitment. What was whizzers, a popular modification to bicycles in the 1940s? Streamers attached to handlebars, small engine attachment, or playing cards in spokes? Small engine attachment. Which 1980s academic term described the application of market principles to previously non-commercial activities? Commodification, economic rationalism, or market penetration? Commodification. What was the Knoll Group, which revolutionized 1950s office environments? Organizational psychology consultants, lighting efficiency engineers, or ergonomic furniture designers? Ergonomic furniture designers. Which unusual trend in 1970s home entertainment was known as environmental records? Vinyl LPs with nature sounds for relaxation, recycled album packaging, or outdoor-friendly portable stereo systems? Vinyl LPs with nature sounds for relaxation. What was the new brutalism introduced in architectural discourse in the 50s? A decorative style using ornate concrete forms, an ethical approach to honest expression of materials, or a construction technique emphasizing soundproofing? An ethical approach to honest expression of materials. Which cultural phenomenon of the 1990s was called ringtone culture? Personalized mobile phone alert sounds, door chime customization trend, or electronic jewelry with sound components? Personalized mobile phone alert sounds. What was the Memphis Group, which challenged conventional design in the 1980s? Urban Renewal Architectural Consultancy, record label specializing in blues reissues, or postmodern design collective using bold colors and patterns? Postmodern design collective using bold colors and patterns. Which 1950s educational innovation was known as teaching machines? Film strip projectors with synchronized audio, public television broadcasting for schools, or mechanical devices for programmed instruction? Mechanical devices for programmed instruction. What was the Gibson Girl, which influenced early 20th century fashion and culture? Female guitarist who pioneered women in rock music, character from a popular radio drama series, or idealized illustration of the modern American woman? Idealized illustration of the modern American woman. Which psychological term coined in the 40s describes how people rationalize difficult choices after making them? Cognitive dissonance reduction, post-decision reconciliation, or choice validation syndrome? Cognitive dissonance reduction. What was the Aquarian Exposition, the official name of a famous 1969 event? Underwater photography exhibition, Woodstock Music Festival, or environmental awareness program? Woodstock Music Festival. Which home technology of the 60s was marketed as electronic vigilance? Smoke detector, home security system, or baby monitor? Smoke detector. What was the culture industry, a concept analyzed by Theodore Adorno in the 1940s? Agricultural manufacturing techniques, scientific laboratory methodology, or film and media mass production's effect on society? Film and media mass production's effect on society. Which 1970s psychological philosophical term described the challenge to grand narratives about knowledge and progress? Critical theory, structuralism, or postmodernism? Postmodernism. What was the hanging chain, a design technique used in Antonio Gaudi's architectural work? Suspended decorative elements in building interiors, construction safety practice for high-rise buildings, or a method for creating optimal arch shapes using gravity? A method for creating optimal arch shapes using gravity. Which 1990s technology was initially called spectacles before receiving its commercial name? Prescription contact lenses, digital camera filters, or virtual reality headsets? Virtual reality headsets. What was the Brainstorm Club, founded in Silicon Valley in the 1980s? Early venture capital networking group, computer programming competition, or creative thinking workshop series? Early venture capital networking group. Which 1950s entertainment term described television programs created specifically to sell products? Sponsored programming, commercial integration, or product placement? Sponsored programming. What was quadrophenia besides being an album by The Who? A mental health condition characterized by 4 distinct personalities, a camera lens that captured 4 images simultaneously, or a 4-speaker home audio configuration? A 4-speaker home audio configuration. Which sociological concept developed in the 1960s describes how groups maintain boundaries between insiders and outsiders? Social closure, in-group favoritism, or boundary maintenance? Social closure. What was the fantasy document, a term coined by sociologist Lee Clark? Early role-playing game rulebook, psychological assessment tool for measuring creativity, or organizational plans that look functional but wouldn't work in reality? And the last one is the answer. Which 1940s fabric innovation was marketed as the miracle fiber? Nylon, polyester, or acrylic? Nylon. What was the bullet time, a filmmaking technique popularized in the late 1990s? Visual effect creating slow motion around a moving subject, quick cut editing style for action sequences, or method for synchronizing sound effects with gunfire? Visual effect creating slow motion around a moving subject. Which psychological concept articulated in the 1970s describes how external rewards can reduce intrinsic motivation? Reward displacement, motivation crowding, or over-justification effect? Over-justification effect. What was the selective sequence electronic calculator unveiled in 1948? Early IBM computer, specialized accounting machine, or automated music composition device? Early IBM computer. Which 1980s cultural phenomenon was known as zines or fanzines? Local television programs produced by viewers, teen fan clubs for musicians, or self-published small circulation magazines? Self-published small circulation magazines. What was the picture phone, first demonstrated publicly in 1964? A video telephone system, portable camera with instant printing, or television with photo storage capability? Video telephone system. Which architectural element popular in 50 suburban homes was called the conversation pit? Outdoor barbecue space, sunken living room seating area, or a kitchen breakfast nook? Sunken living room seating area. What was the human potential movement that emerged in the 1960s? Psychological approach focused on personal growth and fulfillment, athletic training methodology, or educational reform initiative? Psychological approach focused on personal growth and fulfillment. Which 1970s design innovation was known as the Challenge Program? Architectural competition for affordable housing, fashion industry initiative for new designers, or corporate office redesign focusing on workflow efficiency? And the last one is the answer. What was the spiral of silence, a media theory proposed in 1974? Television's decreasing educational content, how public opinion forms when people fear isolation, or newspaper reporting becoming increasingly sensationalist? How public opinion forms when people fear isolation. Which early electronic musical instrument from the 1920s was played without physical contact? Telharmonium, theremin, or trautonium? Theremin. What was the Garden City movement, influential in early 20th century urban planning? Urban farming initiative, botanical garden development in metropolitan areas, or self-contained communities combining urban and rural features? And the last one is the answer. Which 1990s term described the psychological impact of transitioning between virtual environments and reality? Cyberspace hangover, digital dissonance, or virtual rebound? Cyberspace hangover. What was the lipstick index, an economic indicator proposed in 2001? A measure of consumer confidence in luxury goods, fashion industry pricing variability metric, or cosmetic sales increasing during economic downturns? Cosmetic sales increasing during economic downturns. Which 1960s cognitive concept describes how people filter out unimportant stimuli? Cognitive filtering, selective attention, or perceptual gating? Selective attention. What was the knowledge, a requirement for London taxi drivers established in 1865? Foreign language proficiency, memorization of all London streets and landmarks, or vehicle maintenance certification? Memorization of all London streets and landmarks. Which psychological term, coined in the 1970s, describes the tendency to falsely remember past predictions as more accurate than they were? Retrospective enhancement, hindsight bias, or memory inflation? Hindsight bias. What was the living newspaper, a theatrical form developed in the 1930s? Interactive home entertainment before television, community bulletin board system, or dramatizations of current events for educational purposes? Dramatizations of current events for educational purposes. Which 1950s architectural style was characterized by angular structures, atomic motifs, and futuristic designs? Brutalism, Googie architecture, or international style? Googie architecture. What was the quantified self movement that gained prominence in the 2000s? Mathematical Education Initiative, self-tracking with technology to improve health and performance, or data-driven financial planning approach? Self-tracking with technology to improve health and performance. Which linguistic term describes a process where a brand name becomes a generic term for a product type? Genericide, semantic broadening, or brand dilution? Genericide. What was the studio system dominant in Hollywood from the 20s to the 50s? Sound recording technology standard, vertical integrated film production and distribution model, or actor training methodology? Vertically integrated film production and distribution model. Which cognitive bias identified in the 70s causes people to make different choices when the same option is presented differently? Framing effect, presentation bias, or context dependency? Framing effect. What was the tiki culture popular in America from the 40s to the 60s? Polynesian-themed entertainment and design aesthetic, surfing lifestyle and fashion, or tropical fruit importation business? Polynesian-themed entertainment and design aesthetic. Which architectural term describes the restoration of buildings to a romanticized original state that may never have existed? Historical reimaging, facadism, or adaptive recreation? Facadism. What was the mechanical bride analyzed by Marshall McLuhan in 1951? Advertising's effect on modern consciousness, early household appliance marketing, or automobile design's cultural influence? Advertising's effect on modern consciousness. Which early computer memory technology of the 1950s used small magnetic donuts? Delay line memory, core memory, or drum storage? core memory. What was the natural step and organizational framework developed in the 1980s? Ergonomic workplace movement pattern, sustainable development methodology, or progressive employee training program? Sustainable development methodology. Which 1960s concept in urban studies described the distinction between public and private urban spaces? Zonal allocation, defensible space, or civic partitioning? Defensible space. What was the uncanny valley, a theory proposed in 1970? Discomfort caused by almost human robots or animations, architectural principle for creating unsettling spaces, or psychological response to artificial landscapes? Discomfort caused by almost human robots or animations. Which social science term describes rules that guide behavior in specific situations? This was developed in the 1950s. Behavioral protocols, social scripts, or situational norms? Social scripts. What was the Children's Television Workshop established in 1968? Organization that created Sesame Street, theater program for young performers, or film animation studio specializing in educational content? Organization that created Sesame Street. Which 1970s psychological concept describes how observing others' behavior can shape our own? Behavioral modeling, imitative cognition, or social learning theory? Social learning theory. What was the Graphic Standards Manual, first published in 1970? Comic book industry content regulation, design guideline document for the New York City subway system, or international printing quality benchmark? Design guideline document for the New York City subway system. Which 1990s digital technology was initially called CAT, the Astonishing Tribe? Virtual reality gaming platform, digital photography filter system, or early smartphone user interface design? Early smartphone user interface design. What was the paradox of choice, a concept explored by psychologist Barry Schwartz? Consumer preference for limited edition products, marketing technique using artificial scarcity, or how more options can lead to decreased satisfaction? How more options can lead to decreased satisfaction. Which 1940s innovation in restaurant service was called the tray mobile? Hospital meal delivery cart, cafeteria conveyor belt, or drive-in car hop serving system? Drive-in car hop serving system. What was the slow movement which began in the 1980s? Low impact exercise methodology, manufacturing technique for handcrafted goods, or a cultural shift emphasizing quality over speed? Cultural shift emphasizing quality over speed. Which cognitive concept developed in the 1950s suggests that humans can process approximately 7 items in working memory? Cognitive load threshold, Miller's magical number, or attention span limitation? Miller's magical number. What was the kitchen debate, a famous 1959 exchange? An impromptu discussion between Nixon and Khrushchev, television cooking competition format, or architectural controversy over efficient home design? An impromptu discussion between Nixon and Khrushchev. Which 1970s building material innovation was marketed as the forever surface? Corian countertop material, permanent exterior house paint, or stain-resistant carbon fiber? Corian countertop material. What was the matchbook collection, a popular hobby of the mid-20th century? Illuminism, cataloging, or ephemera gathering? Illuminism. Which organizational management theory developed in the 1980s emphasized constant small improvements? Total quality management, Six Sigma, or Kaizen? Kaizen. What was the Mimeo Revolution, active from the 60s through the 1980s? Photocopying industry standardization, office equipment manufacturing boom, or small press literary movement using mimeograph technology? A small press literary movement. Which psychological principle, identified in the 1970s, describes how memorable examples influence probability judgments? Anchoring effect, availability heuristic, or representativeness bias? Availability heuristic. What was the Whole Earth Catalog, published between 1968 and 1972? First Comprehensive Environmental Impact Assessment, Government Handbook for Agricultural Best Practices, or Counterculture magazine featuring tools for sustainable living? Counterculture magazine. Which 1950s innovation in audio technology was called binaural fidelity? Early stereophonic sound recording, headphone design for flight communication, or acoustic architectural principle? Early stereophonic sound recording. What was the Gaia hypothesis proposed in the 1970s? Early climate change prediction model, astronomical theory about habitable planets, or a theory that Earth functions as a self-regulating system? Theory that Earth functions as a self-regulating system. Which 1990s term described the predictive massive computer failure at the year 2000? Digital doomsday, the Y2K bug, or the millennium crash? The Y2K bug. What was the Peckham experiment conducted between 1926 and 1950? Urban planning simulation, educational curriculum testing, or public health study focused on preventative care? Public health study focused on preventive care. Which anthropological term describes the study of human-designed objects and environments? Artifact analysis, material culture, or environmental ethnography? Material culture. What was the Cranbrook Academy, established in 1932? Influential design school, architectural preservation society, or scientific research institution? Influential design school. Which 1980s linguistic term described the tendency to use hedging a language to appear less assertive? Powerless speech, linguistic mitigation, or verbal softening? Powerless speech. What was the arcology concept proposed by Paolo Soleri in the 1960s? Archaeological site preservation methodology, museum exhibition design philosophy, or architecture integrating ecology in hyperstructures? Architecture integrating ecology in hyperstructures. Which psychological effect identified in the 70s describes how people attribute their success to skill, but failures to bad luck? Attributional asymmetry, self-serving bias, or outcome polarization? Self-serving bias. What was the Scott theory developed in the 1980s? Cognitive model for decision-making under pressure, urban planning approach for mixed-use developments, or framework analyzing how social factors shape technology development? Framework analyzing how social factors shape technology development. What was the name of the 1968 international agreement that aimed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons? Give us this answer in the comments, along with how you scored with our quiz class Einstein rewards. We'd love to know how you did. Thanks for playing, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.